Welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast, the show that empowers gay men to live their fullest, healthiest lives. Whether you're navigating relationships, mental health, intimacy, finances, career, or personal growth, Ken Howard, a licensed clinical social worker in California, certified psychiatric social worker, and ASEC certified sex therapist, is here to guide you with over 30 years of experience, specializing in gay male individuals, couples, and polycules. As the founder of gaytherapyla.com and gaycoachingla.com. And now, today's episode.
Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about gay men and legal case support. You know, when people think of therapy, they tend to think about getting help for a lot of classic, recognizable things: depression, anxiety, relationship problems, sexual problems, ADHD, OCD, PTSD, recovering from a breakup, dealing with a stressful job, coping with loss or grief, stabilizing their finances, overcoming substance abuse issues, or healing from trauma. In my 32-year career as a gay therapist specializing in therapy for gay men as individuals, couples, or polycules, I've helped guys over and over with these kinds of problems and more, helping them to lead a better quality of life, healed, and as reasonably happy as they can be in this lifetime. What is sometimes overlooked when people think of therapy is coping with the more unusual stressors of life events, although not exactly unheard of things or things that are actually all that uncommon. And I'll be writing about some of these in the months ahead. But the one I want to focus on today is how a gay men specialist therapist, I've actually helped gay men cope with a specific kind of stressor, and that is when they are involved in the legal or justice system. Gay men historically and currently have been the victims of discrimination in housing or the workplace. They've been the victims of violent crime or even white-collar crime, such as being scammed out of money. I'm helping a guy with that now. They have been in workplace or traffic or other kinds of accidents and need to pursue relief for their injuries as a plaintiff. More rarely, they've been accused of crimes and have had to defend themselves in court against untrue allegations. Or they've had divorce or even child custody battles in court. So while obviously these legal situations and more are best handled by licensed attorneys, there actually is a role for the psychotherapist if you are, like me, the kind of psychotherapist who is willing to take on these kinds of clients. Now, not every psychotherapist is. They might be very psychodynamic, they might be very basically trained, they may have no interest or no aptitude in dealing with this kind of problem. They would probably refer the client out to someone who does have an aptitude or an interest in that. It's not the most common psychotherapy topic. Some of my more conservative colleagues might say it's not even appropriate, but I make an argument for how it is appropriate and how it can work therapy for people in legal situations. So psychotherapy for a client who is going through a stressful legal process is not meant to be at all a substitute for legal representation by an attorney. So the psychotherapy is not for legal advice. You know, that would be outside the scope of professional duties for a psychotherapist and therefore unethical or even illegal. However, just as there is a role for the attorney in representing their client with their case in the legal system, or even an individual acting on his own behalf informed by an attorney's guidance, such as when you're representing yourself in small claims court, there is a role for therapists who can or are willing to help clients with this. Some of the things I've helped gay men with legal troubles include how to remain calm, clear, focused, and cultivate endurance for what is often a protracted period of time while the case wins its way through the court system towards some kind of settlement or resolution or even verdict. Here are some of the ways I, or perhaps even other psychotherapists, might assist a client with coping with a legal case. So number one, in no particular order, is role play. One of the most stressful things, if you didn't know, about a legal case is when you either have to be subjected to a deposition, which is a formal interview on the record with a court reporter or stenographer taking down every word everyone says, or being on a witness stand in a courtroom and giving testimony. Your lawyer will generally give you softball questions that help you plead your case, while the opposing counsel, or the lawyers for the other side, will also get a chance to question you and do their best to charm, intimidate, confuse, cajole, manipulate, guilt, or just plain bore you into saying something that incriminates you and diminishes your credibility and diminishes the argument for your case. They will also try to undermine you or somehow degrade your credibility or challenge your accomplishments or even your credentials. They're clever little folks, these lawyers. They know what they're doing when they're doing that. So while that is a legal proceeding, it's hard to talk about examination, interviewing, a lawyer thing, without also talking about negative emotions. That would be a therapist thing, such as anxiety, confusion, befuddlement, self-doubt, and even anger. Negative emotions can make us lose our cool and substitute emotions for the facts and argument points of your case. In a deposition or a testimony, all is fair. It's a war between the attorneys. One tries to press their case as the complainant or the plaintiff. And in my experience, that's often been gay men who've been discriminated against. I've also helped guys with anti-HIV/AIDS discrimination, anti-psychiatric discrimination, racial discrimination, or this shrill and exaggerated war on drugs cases, among many others. And even though there's some protections, if you have a lawyer present in a deposition or a courtroom, your attorney can always object and kind of keep the other attorney in line. There are some rules. They can't just kind of beat you up on the stand. But that's a very legal process. It has to be a legitimate objection. It has to be either sustained or overruled by a judge. But there is a sense that your attorney is there to protect you and can intervene with an objection under certain circumstances. So in therapy, the negative emotions can, in many cases, be anticipated. We don't know which of a number of tactics the opposing counsel might use to rattle you or to get under your skin or throw you so off that your testimony isn't as compelling or cogent and clear as it could be, but we know they're coming after you. We know to anticipate that that's coming. That's part of their job. That's part of their game. And actually, that's okay. That's part of the process. Every legal case is generally about two sides, and it's only fair that the process of seeking the truth of the situation through the legal process is how we arrive at parts of our civilized society. And despite how nasty cross-examination can be, in addition to sometimes just the intimidation of being in a legal process space, like a courthouse or a deposition room, and the intimidating presence of a judge overseeing all of the proceedings, who oftentimes they're just looking for ways to be impatient and condescending and stern, and yet seemingly impartial. I actually would not want to live in a world where we didn't have these things, where the justice system didn't have a point-counterpoint process so that both accusations and defenses could be thoroughly aired toward a resolution. So when the negative emotions for the client in the legal process come to be, whatever they are, in the actual situation of testimony, sometimes I'll actually role play in advance with my client and teach them and coach them what it's like to calm down and focus, gather their thoughts, understand their timeline, understand any witnesses that were involved, understand the facts and the sequence of events that happened, and help them to understand that they are under scrutiny and you can play the game with a clear head. Now, I'm not a lawyer, not an actor, but a therapist who does a role play in session like this can give the client some behavioral dress rehearsal on what it's like to talk about the facts of their case and their implications, and maybe a little bit about how the situation has negatively affected them, called the damages in a case. And when we do this role play as an exercise, almost like a little game, they get a taste of what it's like to be verbally manipulated by the sometimes aggressive opposing counsel. Now, verbal manipulation or intimidation are not the things that we first think of when we think about how a therapist interacts with a client and serves that client in the session work. Far from it. We want to appear supportive and comforting, but we have a discussion beforehand that is about the role play, that it's a game. It's even a type of improvisational theater. I have a BA in theater as one of my degrees from UCLA in Los Angeles. Got that before I went back to school over and over to become a therapist. So I can invoke some old skills and maybe a minimum of acting talent to portray the role of the attorney. And we know that the client and I know that that's what I'm doing. And of course, they play the role of the client, but they're actually playing themselves. So I always say that it's better to do a role play exercise and have a sample of the negative emotions that can come up in that process there in session rather than wait until they are giving actual real testimony in a courtroom or a deposition room that's recorded for all posterity. We prepare, we go into, we enact, and then come out of, and then process the role play exercise. We might also switch roles where the client interrogates me as the client and I model possible ways of answering the question. But that's something I generally avoid because it's a little too close to giving legal advice and telling them what to say. And I'm licensed in California to conduct psychotherapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy exercises like a role play, and I'm not a licensed attorney. So we have to clarify where those lines are and understand where the big, important ethical differences are. So if the client should be questioned later, which some have been, if they've been coached on their testimony, they usually just say that they've processed their anxiety with their therapist. Now, theoretically, this could prompt the therapist to be called in to testify, and the attorney and counsel say, what the hell did you do to this client? But I haven't really had that situation come up. More than once, my client has come back to a therapy session after they've made their deposition or their court testimony and laughed about how similar our prior role play and the actual examination was. I guess I'm playing at being a lawyer somewhat convincingly. And they'll express relief that they felt imminently prepared. So one client reported they actually started giggling when he was cross-examined by the opposing counsel, and she asked him some of the exact same questions that I just made up in the role play. And when he giggled on the stand, the actual attorney angrily asked, "What's so funny, Mr. So-and-so? Do you think this is all some joke?" And my client gathered himself and simply said a funny remark a friend that had said had just popped into his head. And then she calmed down and moved on with the interview. And as a postscript, he won his case and a large 6-figure settlement for anti-gay discrimination, which not only paid for his therapy, I think it also paid for his new BMW. So that worked out well. Number 2, in addition to something like a role play exercise, is just the word stamina. One of the components of enduring a legal case and all the multi-week, multi-month, or year process is the stamina that's required emotionally and physically to see the case through over theoretically many months before its resolution. And in the short term, to have the stamina to endure a long day or days, sometimes depositions go a few days, or very long days in court. The 8 hours of giving a deposition feels a lot longer than your average 8-hour workday. So in therapy, we might use mindfulness meditation exercises or progressive muscle relaxation. We might do some cognitive reframing, looking at ideas or statements from a different point of view. We might look at how the client is using their own self-talk to either make them feel better or worse, depending on what they're saying. And, a sense of pacing to get through a long process. Understanding what triggers tension emotionally, such as being intimidated by someone doubting the veracity of your case, and physically, the triggering of the flight, fight, or freeze instinct are important. We discuss what are the adaptive coping strategies for these various triggers. Psychologically, a person on the stand who's being, kind of harangued by the opposing counsel, it might trigger things like when they might have been bullied by a peer in school, or how a parent might have yelled and screamed in their face when they misbehaved. So it can trigger our defenses to be a recapitulation of other situations that we've been in, and then it triggers our psychological defenses, that almost panic trigger. So in sessions, we might discuss how the client balances the fight of the legal case process with other things in their life that demand time and attention, such as their regular job, their relationship, their own self-care as an individual, their home and domestic duties, and sometimes their role as a parent. Each domain of life is like a slice of the time pie and energy that a client must devote to each of the important areas of life. And when it comes to a legal case, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And one has to learn how to pace themselves in that process. Therapy might be the place to look at self-care routines, such as sources of relaxation and renewal, how to use exercise and nutrition to fuel ourselves for long, demanding days, have some protein, have some carbs, and how to identify and utilize a social support system, which is what clinical social workers like me call a social support system, is the group of people in your life who love and support you, like the spokes of a wheel, and we are the hub of that wheel. Number 3 is having a strong sense of self. Gay men can sometimes, not always, really struggle with self-esteem because we've been subjected to various kinds of heterosexism and homophobia and degradation and devaluation and under-recognition or neglect or abuse or injustice or maltreatment. Maltreatment from parents or siblings, bad teachers, bad coaches, the media, the courts, politicians, bullies, criminals. For a lifetime, we've had a lot of practice, being treated like crap. And all of these add up over time, and it's sometimes hard for gay men to think of ourselves as having basic human rights, such as the right to be protected from harm and the right to be treated well and fairly, in all cases, including the workplace. So when someone doesn't treat us right and fairly, especially in the workplace, and that's specifically because we are gay or male or disabled or HIV positive or older or a person of color or an immigrant or a veteran, and that causes us demonstrable harm like lost wages or lost opportunity or pain and suffering, as we call it, or a loss of their functioning, then we have legal standing to bring a litigation case for attempting to recover or get relief for what we've endured. When the law says, in many, but not all, jurisdictions, that discrimination against a certain group or groups of people just for being who they are is a social ill that undermines the healthy functioning of a society, and we just can't live like that. We can't have that in a functioning society. It's chaotic. We can't be productive, civilized, profitable taxpayers if someone drives us out of our job for dumb reasons. The government loses the taxes that we would have paid from that job, and they might have to spend money on us in unemployment or disability benefits as a result, and we can't have that. And of course, it's also not humane. Oh yeah, there's always that part, right? Never mind the taxpayer part, but let's look at the humane aspect of it. So if we are going to be successful in asserting our rights and pleading our case and seeking and receiving relief, compensation for damages, such as a monetary jury award or some kind of monetary settlement, we need to have a strong sense of self that believes we have a right to be treated well and fairly and to bring hell to pay in the legal system if we don't get it, as long as those discrimination laws are in place. Now, it used to be you could discriminate against gay men, and that's fine. They just had to take it because it wasn't illegal. It's the same thing with women. An employer used to be able to say, we're not hiring you, you're a woman. Well, the hell with that. Nowadays, you can't do that, right? There were laws that were put in place to protect LGBT people, women, people of color, different religions, all of that. But it took the civil rights movement to put those laws on the books, signed by a governor or signed by the president or passed by Congress or defended by the Supreme Court. It's what we call black letter law, meaning laws that are written down in big black letters in the books saying that this is now the law of the land. And that can come and go. We can fight for that and get it. Other times, like in 2025 with the current presidential administration, those black letter laws can be rescinded and bad things that used to be illegal are made legal again. And that's really a problem. So having a strong sense of self to be able to do that sometimes means that in therapy, we have to work on building our self-esteem and our self-confidence and our sense of self-agency, the belief that we can do things and get things done, a sense of self-empowerment, that nobody's coming, we have to do it ourselves, and sometimes what I call a healthy haughtiness, to not abandon ourselves and passively, just be okay with what happened to us, but to fight back. Think of classic movie heroines like Norma Ray, which was about factory unions, or Karen Silkwood, who fought for worker safety in a nuclear power plant, or even Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, who stands up to both the Wicked Witch of the West and to the wizard to confront their wrongdoing. Male examples might be superheroes, such as when Superman stands up to Lex Luthor and prevents or brings justice to Luthor's harm to people out of his own greed and lust for power, the classic villain. Or when Batman literally knocks heads together of thugs who want to steal the Social Security money from old people on the streets of Gotham City. Or Wonder Woman, who forces a crook to tell the truth with her magic lasso, or prevents a war with a combination of her powers as both womankind, and goddess of peace composition. In the lore of Wonder Woman, she's part of the earth made of clay and part goddess brought to life by Zeus, as the superhero canon goes. So when gay men observe and admire and emulate the social justice actions of heroes, like fictional ones like superheroes, or real people like Harvey Milk or Martin Luther King, or the drag queen activists at the Stonewall riots, we can then internalize their sense of justice and pride and determination and strength to vanquish, or at least curtail, or at least punish those who would do harm to us or maybe others we care about. And sometimes it is the task in therapy to evolve, to transition, to cultivate going from someone who can't do that to someone who can, because they've been guided to find the hero within themselves, ready to do battle and win. Number 4 is advocating for social justice in the aggregate. So one of the things we talk about when I see clients who are considering or enduring a current legal battle is if it's all worth it. If you ultimately win a settlement or even judge or jury monetary award for your case, especially a large one, I've seen a handful of settlements well over $100,000. Even after your attorney takes his or her or their cut of often about 40% or so of their efforts on a contingency for representing you, that's how they make their living, or they've collected their hourly fees for legal services, whichever, then that's great. If you should get a low settlement or award, or even lose the case entirely, then it's not worth it. So we sometimes have to discuss how a legal proceeding can be a gamble, and gambling can raise anxiety. And how do we cope with anxiety? Because we don't know the outcome of the case before it happens. We can be very pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised, and often an attorney would guide a client by telling them what recent juries on similar cases have been awarding. They will tell you if you have a good case or a bad case and how much it might be worth. There can be social justice or petty politics issues in a jury or a judge's decision that don't actually have to do with the merits of the case. We know that people of color get harsher penalties for things like drug offenses, don't get me started on that, than white people for remarkably similar crimes. And that's not justice, that's politics, but that's always a factor. Or you get some homophobes on a jury, and they're not only going to fail to award you damages, they wish the government would systematically exterminate the entire LGBT community members for living in sin in the first place. It can go all kinds of ways, even outside of the veracity of the testimony given or the facts of the case itself or the evidence or the witness testimony. So risks and pressures like that can give us pause and make us wonder if it's really worth it, especially if we've moved on with our life already months ago and put the bad boss or whatever the situation was far behind us. And that's part of it, is living well is the best revenge. We do want to put that behind us, but we might have to go through a legal case first. But what some guys I've worked with have done is consider that it's not just about seeking justice in their case, such as a gay man being discriminated against in the workplace, but the case is symbolic of all gay men who have been discriminated against, or even people from other legally protected categories, we call them. Because winning a legal case is not just about getting relief and justice for you. It also sends a message to both victims and perpetrators that perpetrators who commit discrimination or other kinds of crimes and act out their hate in illegal ways will get their comeuppance. And when one of us wins, we all win. Some guys I've worked with have said, yeah, that's great. I'm still not going to bother with this. And that's their right, because they have to take care of themselves. And if it's not worth it, if it's going to stress them out or their mental health and even physical health are affected, well, then maybe they just can't fight that fight. Others have said, even if I don't care or need the money from a settlement all that much, I'm going to pursue this anyway, just on principle, and send a message that in a civilized society, if people break the law and commit crimes that end up hurting me or others in my group, my people, then there's going to be payback. Otherwise there's no disincentive for committing those crimes, and they become more prevalent or more outrageous. Compensatory damages, giving you back some of what you've lost, is one thing. Punitive damages tells the defendant committing the crimes that in this country or county or state, we won't stand for that. And maybe a nice big chunky financial fine will make them think twice about committing or allowing their staff to commit discrimination at their company or organization in the future. Lesson learned. Nobody changes their behavior unless they feel it from getting their ass kicked or their wallet kicked. It's very motivating. You have to have either the carrot or the stick, and sometimes you have to have the stick. Don't do this or we will punish you. That's the entire law and order criminal justice system. Number 5, the last part, we look at the meaning of legal settlements. While I'm glad to do my part in supporting and helping a therapy client who's going through the stressors of a tough legal battle, I have frankly gotten a little jealous sometimes when they finally get a large monetary settlement. Early in my career, I certainly didn't have even $100,000 in a retirement account saved up for my old age, but I saw sometimes clients way younger than me get that much or more in a legal settlement. The plaintiff, a gay man, in a local scandal in West Hollywood, where he allegedly experienced sexual harassment from his gay boss, and he was not my client, was awarded a reported $500,000 from the city. And he was in his early 30s, maybe. Some guys don't have $500,000 saved up to their name when they're twice that age. So I don't begrudge these guys getting their awards because they were put through a lot, allegedly, not only with their initial experience, but also in the legal fight afterwards. But one could certainly argue that okay, they've earned it. But I, too, experienced sexual harassment on the job by a gay boss, not the same one. And I was never able to bring a lawsuit about it. I didn't have the resources to bring that. I was also the victim of gender discrimination by being the only male in an all-female office many years ago. And again, my settlement that I did bring by that time was a teeny tiny fraction of some of those others because of just having a bad lawyer. So if you get a settlement, and by how much, depends on a lot of factors, and the size or the circumstances of a settlement does not necessarily carry over from case to case, even when similar crimes are committed. So that's what makes it even more of a gamble. So, despite legal battles being truly stressful, if someone walks away with their entire retirement funded because of it, or at least a big chunk of it, and they can still walk and talk and see and hear and get subsequent jobs that aren't discriminatory and maybe even are quite lucrative, then we start to almost envy the people who were discriminated against and won settlements more than the people who never experienced the crimes in the first place. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that they had to go through that? Again, it's a bit of a gamble, and everyone who gets anywhere near the justice system knows good and well that in the legal system, justice is not always served. So what guides us in this is what we feel. What we feel is right for us to do, how to handle the perpetration of a crime when it comes, how to identify and pursue the resources we need to press a legal case, how to have access to legal services, and how to endure the process when it's happening, and how to recover from it when it's over, and put it in perspective. Now, that last phase of how a legal case might be handled is good for psychotherapy, because part of any trauma recovery, as has been said, after all the healing work is done, or most of it, is what's called making meaning of the trauma and understanding emotionally, psychologically, socially, even existentially, how all of that fits in to the stories of our lives over the long term. Having a crime or other trauma happen to us and pursuing the road to recovery afterward, whether it's a legal, emotional, or social or financial aspect of it, is only one part of what is hopefully a long life for us. I don't think anyone gets through much of life, even to middle age, without having some kind of experience that requires the legal system intervention. It's just part of our society. And in life, we can't expect for us not to make at least some mistakes and to expect life to go smoothly without sometimes having to rely on the legal system and have to almost be forced into fighting the good fight. But rallying resources and coordinating and activating our social support system can really help. And this includes the role of psychotherapy to cope with various stressors and feelings and anxiety, or depression feelings, or panic feelings, or mistrust, or hypervigilance, or being on edge. All these feelings can happen. Sometimes it's also the role of life coaching to get through a tough time in life and to learn and grow from it. I provide both services in separate practices, such as gaytherapyla.com and gaycoachingla.com. And these can have some overlap, but are kept very separate due to many legal and ethical considerations. But there is confusion about that. I wrote about that not too long ago, that coaching and therapy are often in rivalry with each other, and there's some overlap, but there's also some important distinctions, particularly with coaches who try to attempt to do therapy when they haven't had college and grad school and licensure and all of that. That's a problem in our society. So if you're facing a situation where it might be or is illegal for what's happening to you, and you want to pursue a legal action with the system, but you also need emotional support for doing that, consider working with me and letting me be on your side to help you through it. So call me or text me in the United States at 310-339-5778, or email me at ken@gaytherapyla.com. And I can give you more information about how to work with me via the Zoom platform for telehealth from my home office in West Hollywood, California. As Martin Luther King said, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. Maybe not fast enough, maybe not easily enough, but we have to trust that as a society, that's where we're going, particularly in the ongoing advance of justice for people from the LGBT community. You've got this. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.